Welcome to Answers Unleashed, a talk show to help you reshape your brain with science and faith to find the answers in front of you. Now, I know you are always interested in finding out different tips to be able to make not only your life better, but the relationships that you have in your life better. So today we have a special show in store for you. Today's show is Divorcing Him and Remarrying Yourself. Divorcing him and remarrying yourself. Anytime that we are dealing with relationships, we have the ability to not only have a relationship with that person, but form a deeper relationship with ourselves in the process. And so today's show is looking at the type of relationships that are best suited for us versus the ones that are most toxic, that are telltale signs for us to completely get away so we can reinvest in ourselves and the relationship that we have already established with what the most important person that exists, you. So today, we have such an expert here with us today, and I'm so excited. Philippa Sklar is here today. She is the author of 3 well-known books. She is, when you hear her voice, you'll just be completely amazed. And she is an international author, and she has created such women's movements that we're going to talk about today. And she is such a leader and a professional speaker when it comes to understanding how women can be empowered in many different areas of their life. And I'm so pleased to have her here with us, especially during our Women's Month here. So please welcome our guest. Thank you for being here.
What an amazing introduction. Thank you. It's such a delight to be here, Olympia. Thank you.
I am so excited that you're here as well. I am just so amazed. You have such a diverse background. And so let's just inform the audience a little bit about your background. You are not from the United States.
No, I'm from South Africa and I grew up during apartheid. And I come from a political family. My father was the mayor of Johannesburg and was the first mayor to break apartheid in the mayoral chamber. And my mother was a member of the Black Sash, which was an organization of women. And ironically, it was the only organization that the apartheid regime actually feared. And they would keep tabs on what was going on with every single heinous law that they passed. They would monitor court trials because black people in South Africa never got fair trials. So I grew up with that background. So I've been fighting injustice probably since the age I could walk.
What I find most just amazing about that particular background is that you not only had the background of your family of looking at injustices, but you also had the ability to transfer it to allowing people to understand how they were also mimicking injustice in their own life.
Well, I'm also a survivor of abuse. And what I discovered was that, and I was a really slow learner. It took me 3 abusive marriages before I finally learned my lesson.
3.
3. And what I finally got after my 3rd divorce was that I had begun to emulate my abuser in that I was abusing myself worse than he ever did. And this is something that I think women in particular tend to do. That when you talk about divorcing him and marrying yourself, that's the number one thing. You know, in all the years that I've been counseling or coaching women and men, it makes no difference what the problem is. The solution is always the same. And the solution is always the relationship that you have with yourself.
The relationship that you have with yourself. I find that really fascinating. And the reason why that's so powerful is because if listeners, if you follow me and you know that I talk about the tree of brain, it is the left side of the brain, it's the right side of the brain, and the center part of the brain that I call the faith sector. And it's through that faith sector that we imagine and see ourselves in certain situations that allows us to build our life and to build our future in the way that we desire it to. But if we do not have a positive self-image or a way that we see ourselves in a positive type of situation in the future, it clouds every single type of relationship that we have, and the relationships that we have end up mimicking how we see ourselves.
Well, you're absolutely correct, and it all has to do with the story that we tell ourselves. We tell ourselves stories throughout the day. If you have to think that we have really 2 different thought systems. You've got the ego thought system, that's foundation is fear and lack and loss and limitation and conflict and grievances that just keep us in a position of suffering and pain all the time. And then you've got the healthy side, which is, Scott Peck said in The Road Less Traveled, throughout our lives we do battle between our healthy side and our sick side. And the only way that we ever are able to listen to that, that quiet voice of wisdom that you can only hear in silence, that's the voice that we always need to take direction from, not the tyrannical voice of the ego. And that's the quiet voice is one of peace and love and joy and happiness. But we always fall into this pattern, into this habit of we cannot differentiate between an event and the story. Whatever happens is always neutral, but the story we give it is what creates our own suffering. And that's what we have to become aware of. What story are you telling yourself? For instance, for years, I told myself the story that all I was worth was a man who beat me, punched me, kicked me, pulled out bunches of my hair and spat in my face. So what did I do? I brought one abuser into my life after another because that was my belief system. And once I was able to heal and change my entire belief system, it isn't a coincidence that in 7 years I've never met one abuser. So we have to see what story are we telling ourselves that aligns with our belief system.
Let's take us back. Let's take us back to the first time you were married in a relationship where you found that it was not conducive to you. Walk us through that, and what was the moment where you realized that you had to get out?
Well, that was my first marriage. I was very young when I got married the first time, and I didn't really understand why I was so unhappy. Even telling my family things that, reasons why I was leaving, they would say, well, what's so bad? He's not that bad. He's not beating you. He's very wealthy. He's very good looking. What's so terrible about being with him? I couldn't articulate it because I had no idea what emotional abuse was. That 50%, probably I think the statistic is higher, 50% of women are emotionally abused. And in the book, in When Loving Him Hurts, we actually have a thing called the bully barometer.
So you have a book in the audience, When Loving Him Hurts is your book.
Yes.
And before we talk about that a little bit, share with us what that is about and how this story is actually inside of your book.
Okay, so When Loving Him Hurts, my co-writer was Sue Hickey, who was my therapist for many years. And she invited me to write this book with her, which was just astounding. You can imagine what it felt like. For years, I'd thought that I was worthless, and here I have a woman who I hold in the highest regard, wanting me to write a book with her.
That's amazing.
And what she said, the reason why, is that she said that nobody is more qualified than somebody who's been there. And I've had 3 marriages and I've been there. So we wrote it from a survivor's point of view and a therapist's point of view. And had she written on her own, she said it would have been a dry textbook. So we talk about emotional abuse because it's so often ignored with women. And it's absolutely as defeating as physical abuse. And what's so sad is that the majority of women who are emotionally abused say they wish that they were being hit, so at least they've got something to show. Because you can't show the emotional scars.
That is one of the most horrific and telling statements that there exist. Emotional abuse is just as powerful as physical abuse, if not more, because it changes and alters the person's belief system in their own thought pattern that changes their entire life.
Sure.
What are some signs? What are 3 signs that someone knows that they are being emotionally abused, that maybe they have, by listening to the show, will have an opportunity to understand that?
Okay, so we have, as I was talking earlier, I mentioned the bully barometer. So it's a 16-point checklist, and you need to mark 12 out of the 16 to qualify. Anything less than 12, you're just in a lousy relationship. So the things that...
I think we have all experienced one of those before at one point or another.
So, relentless criticism is one. Not valuing your opinions. Using humor as a way of putting you down and then saying afterwards, oh, I was just joking. Well, you know what? A joke's only funny when 2 people are laughing. Control of money, control of sex, control of your movements. So once you start working out and also isolation is huge with abusers, that they will isolate you from your family and your support system. And if you're aware of all of this, and if this is what's going on, you're being emotionally abused.
So your first relationship, your first marriage,
yes,
you were experiencing these check off of the system on which you have designed and you share from your own experience, and you were recognizing that you were being emotionally not admired in the way in which you deserve to be. What was the point in time where your thoughts changed?
You must remember my first marriage, I was so young. I got married when I was 20. I had no idea what any of this was. This was only years later when I reflected over all my experiences in my marriages that I understood, that I could identify what emotional abuse is. With my second husband, who was horrendously physically violent, that's what changed everything for me. That's when I realized that it took me 7 years before I would accept I was an abused woman. I used to think that abused women were uneducated and they, the abusers were skinheads with missing teeth and scars on their face. I couldn't possibly be an abused woman. I came from this affluent background, and my abuser was far too rich, too good looking, too sophisticated. Until one night I found myself on the sidewalk. He had tried to put a cigar out on my cheek. He had choked me. He had bit my mouth till it filled with blood. And I have no idea where I got the strength, but I managed to duck under his arms. He had held me up against the wall, and I grabbed the remote. I don't even know how I managed to think of that, and ran out of the house. And in South Africa, we have security guards roaming some of the streets in some of the areas. And I pressed the panic button, and the security guard came. I saw his headlights coming up the driveway, and I ran out to him, and we had to wait for the police to arrive because it was a scene of a crime. And there I am with my clothes torn. I've got these welts around my neck. My mouth is filled with blood. And I said, "Isn't it unusual to get a call like this in this area?" And he said, "No, actually, we get more calls from this area than any others." And Marie Claire did an article of me a few weeks later calling it Lifestyles of the Rich and Vicious. So it puts, you change your belief systems. When you have an experience of abuse, it changes everything about you. And what I learned after my third divorce, that the common denominator with my men was me. And one of the messages in the book is that we reduce the idea of being a victim. Women who have been abused, and quite frankly, they've been given a get-out-of-jail-free card for too long because they believe that they were unlucky in love. But the truth is that we choose these men as much as they choose us. And I know that most people are thinking, what do you mean we are to blame? No, we are not to blame. We are never to blame for abuse. But we are, and when you see where you are responsible, for instance, I trained my abuser that it was okay to beat me because I forgave him every time. When you take responsibility for what your contribution is to the dance of abuse, you then know that you have the responsibility and the power to get yourself out of it. And that's what we encourage women to do. We say to them, for women in emotionally abusive relationships, the majority of these women can't just get up and leave. They've got kids they've got to look after. There's financial concerns. So we say, okay, you can stay or you can leave, but you can't stay the same. This is what you need to do to change. And that's why we provide these skills and strategies for how to transform their lives. And that's what I'm talking about, that women who are abused, we must never, ever think that we are helpless and that we are victims, because we are not.
Well, that is the truth. In any type of situation, any type of rough situation that we go through, we are never a victim.
No, we're not.
And I recognize that from my personal experience. I remember when I was 10 years old, and there was a gang member in the classroom who filed down a ring, and he got angry because I told him some words. I didn't realize I had a hot mouth back then. And I told him some words, and he got angry, and he stood up, and he sliced my face open. Almost lost my eye. And I had to realize that I wasn't a victim. I almost lost my eye, had my eye closed shut for a month, couldn't see out of it, nearly blinded. By the grace of God, I will say that. The only thing that's on my face right now is a little line, thanks to the beautiful work of the surgeon that sewed up my face when I was younger. And I had to recognize out of my own situation that I was not a victim, but rather I contributed to the situation. I didn't realize that what I was saying and what I was doing angered the person, and I had a choice. I could get up and walk away, but I didn't know I'd had that choice. And it took years for me to realize that each of us always have a choice. And when we do not recognize and we do not remember and take ownership over the fact that we have a choice in every single situation that we are in, when we don't understand that, that's when we fall into abuse.
Well, what you're saying is absolutely correct. You had that situation. You could have allowed that event to define your life. And that's what so many women do. We define our lives and our existence and our validity on our worst mistake, on our most shameful decision, and on our most abusive relationship. And that's the choice that we get to make every second of the day. Which thought system do we want to follow? The ego thought system, or the one to realize our best selves? And when you know that you have that power of choice, that today I can choose what thoughts I want, what feelings I want, that nobody has the power to rob me of my peace of mind unless I choose to allow it.
You help women on a massive scale. You have formed the Women's Voice Project.
Yes.
And this is a new organization. And I remember sitting down with you, and I was just so amazed. It was last year. And I was sitting down with you. We were over having lunch. And we were talking about making sure women's voices were being heard. And we were talking about the election. And later on, there was like a huge march of women in the election, which was like amazing. And then but this movement of understanding how important women's voices are, with understanding how they can change not only their life, but change society through their decisions. And share a little bit more about this project that you have.
You know, the AA principle, the reason why AA works is because it's one addict telling their story to another addict. And with women have an incredible ability to tell their stories in the most powerful way and to affect change. And what I found with domestic violence is that we can never ever reduce domestic violence by throwing money at shelters or hotlines. Not to say that they're not important, of course they are. But how do we really affect change and reduce domestic violence? I'm more interested in preventative measures, going into schools, into colleges. If young girls are taught the warning signs of abuse, they'll be able to recognize the abusive relationship, and knowing the signs can save their life. If young boys are taught how abusers can be profiled. One of the things in the book, we profile abusers as Adam, Brett, and Clive, A, B, and C. So Adam becomes an abuser because he was brought up by a mother who he couldn't trust. So he hates women, because the majority of people think that abusers are misogynists and that they hate women. That's not true. They're abusers who fight very, very hard to keep their women. Then you get Brett, who's an abuser because he's emulating his abusive father, and he grows up believing that's just how men are and that's how relationships are. And then you get Clive, who's an abuser because he has an enmeshed mother. He was brought up to believe that the slightest discomfort he has, his mother will fix it for him. So he thinks that any discomfort he ever has in his life, it's a woman's job to fix it, and God help her if she doesn't. So when young boys can recognize that they can be profiled, they'll be able to recognize if they're at risk and hopefully do something about it. But more important than that, if young boys are brought up hearing the stories of abuse through an abused woman's eyes, they may think twice about raising their fist. One of the first talks I gave when I came back to LA last year, I was asked to give a talk to a group of batterers. Now there's this group of about 30 men who are mandated for treatment.
Now, batterers. Now, these
Abusers.
are men that have abused their spouses or wives.
Yes.
And they are court mandated
Absolutely.
to attend
Sure.
training seminar to
Yes.
find out how not to do that.
Exactly.
All right.
So they're 30, and I was warned that these men would be quite hostile towards me. And two
Really?
of them were gang leaders. They were these huge, big, massive guys, tattooed from head to toe. Some of them in the group had ankle bracelets on. So I went in.
What an environment.
It was amazing.
I would be like, whoa, what type of place is this?
But listen to what happened. So I give my talk, and I talk, and we talk. And after my talk, these two massive guys with the tattoos had tears streaming down their face. Tears. Because they are abusers. They've been abused as well. They're victims as well. And nobody is able to, they are so used to being told how terrible they are, how disgusting, how evil. But people don't recognize that they are abusers. They've been abused themselves. It's learned behavior.
So they're repeating the cycle of abuse, and they didn't realize how they were abused themselves.
Exactly. And one of the reasons why I've had my workshops approved in the LAUSD in 2 school districts so far is because the statistics that show kids growing up in a domestic violence home, whether they're experiencing violence themselves or just witnessing it, just by witnessing it, it actually changes the DNA in a child's brain. That the percentage, and I don't want to be incorrect, but there's a huge percentage land up abusing alcohol and drugs. they're far more prone to becoming abusers themselves. So unless we put this program into schools and colleges, we are never going to get anywhere with domestic violence.
Well, it is an educational process.
Yeah.
When people recognize that they have not only a choice in deciding what type of situation they will continuously be in, but recognize that they have a choice in breaking a pattern, then the question is, how can you reverse any type of damage that has been done? And we're excited because we can always, this is what I love about this show. This is what I love about humanity, and this is what I love about growth. Whatever traumatic situation that we have been in, whatever traumatic situation that you have been in, you're always able to reverse the outcome based on what you do next.
That's so true. I don't even recognize the woman who I used to be. But one of the things we have to recognize, especially with domestic violence, with victims, is that the last thing a woman wants to be given is another instruction. So when they, how often have we heard first time the victim, second time the volunteer, and if she goes back, she gets what she deserves. The majority of abused women are codependent. So we associate love with need, and we have to work in order to get love and approval.
So for the audience members that may not be as aware of codependency, just share a little bit, what is codependency exactly?
So codependency is when we associate love with need, that unless we are working like a slave for a man's approval, it's not worth anything. Our pathology demands damaged, wounded men in order for us to feel that that's what love is. One of the first things I did when I began to heal, I defined what love is. And I actually took out a piece of paper and I put a line down the center. And on the left-hand column, I described what love meant for me. So what does love mean for us? Which woman ever defines love? We always say, oh, but I love him, I love him. Well, what is love? Well, love is trustworthiness, kindness, support, the ability to grow together. And in the other column, I described the love I was getting. There wasn't a single word that correlated. So we have to redefine what love is. For codependents, our currency is approval. So we will do anything, even to the point of at the cost of our lives. We will do whatever it takes in order to win approval from them. Do you remember the incident with Janae Rice, when the whole world was up in arms? Remember that incident when she was beaten in the elevator, and you saw him pulling her out of the elevator and her dress was riding up. And after that, she came out and apologized for her contribution, and America was up in arms about it. But as an abused woman, I understand that, because when we side with our abuser and protect him, it makes us feel special, that it's him and I against the world, that only we can understand how special our love is. So it's having to break down all of this about codependency, and this is exactly what we do in the book. We define it. We show how it's bred in childhood. We explain and define the patterns so that women can recognize where they fall into this. How, we also have a thing where they can write in, and they have to follow these certain assignments with specific guidelines.
So, okay. So let's say this is Sally. Sally is in a situation where she is dating this guy that she really likes. She's really attracted to him, but he's not spending much time with her like she likes. And she's recognizing that that's not the type of relationship she wants. It's everything that he wants to do. It's when he feels like he wants to see her, and she's just so attracted to him, she doesn't know what to do next. And it's not necessarily abusive, but it's not what she wants either. How would you help, or what recommendations would you give this woman?
Okay, so first, as I said, there's only one solution ever, and that's the relationship we have with ourselves. What does Sally have to believe about herself that she's prepared to compromise her values in order to get love? Is she a beggar, going with her begging bowl to get some kind of crumbs that he's prepared to throw out for her? I'll give you an example. One of my clients phoned me the one day. She's having an affair with a married man, and she was so excited because they belong to the same cycling club, and he had asked her to drive the 7-hour drives for the weekend to this cycle race that they were going to, and his wife was going to fly in that day. So I said, oh, aren't you lucky?
Wow.
You can be his babysitter for 7 hours. And you can then, if you think that that's all you are worth, that you can massage his ego with his wife to make him feel that he's so lucky that both of you want him. And if you're particularly lucky, You'll even manage to have sex with him that night before his wife arrives. Now, if that's what you think all you are worth, go for it. Well, of course, she was appalled. She said, forget it, I'm not going. That's it, I'm done. So that's what I'll say to Sally too.
Wow. Wow. Okay, so the question is now, all right, let's take Jessica.
Yes.
Jessica is a woman who has been married to a man who is a workaholic, and he doesn't pay attention to her in any way, shape, or form. She finds herself having to always take care of the kids and do all majority of the work while he flies and earns the money. And he considers himself the breadwinner, so he doesn't have to do as much responsibilities, but she's overwhelmed at home. And then he does not necessarily meet her needs while the things that she needs at home. What recommendation would you give for her?
Oh boy, have I got an answer for her. Do you know, we all enter relationships with this expectation that the other person's responsibility is to make us happy. Well, how dare we? We don't even know what makes us happy. How dare we say that somebody else should have that burden? I would say, her name Jessica. Jessica, you are so lucky to have such an amazing man. Go out and find a way to make yourself happy and let him carry on bringing home the money, because me, that's what I would prefer.
Okay, this is just too fun here. All right, so let's say it's Victoria.
Yeah.
Let's say Victoria. This is the last. This is the last tip that you have. Let's say Victoria is a person who is a single mom, and she has baby daddy issues. And let's say that she has to deal with the baby's father, who's complains about child support, and she's interested in dating people, but she is scared that she will not meet the type of person that's suited for her, who she really wants, because she has a responsibility of being a single mom. What advice would you give her?
Well, she's going to be proved right, because whatever we think is true. So if that's what she thinks she's going to find, she'll get it. I thought all I would find was an abuser, and I found them. So then she needs to change her belief system. She has to go back to thinking, how can she possibly make such a generalization and actually have a belief that all men will not meet her expectations or won't be decent, kind, loving, accepting men? Our worldview is determined by our perception, and our perception is from what we think and believe. She needs to go back to the drawing board of herself to say, what is my belief system? What absolute nonsense. There are some amazing men out there. It's no coincidence that I, for example, have not met a single abuser in the last 7 years, since my last divorce. Do you think that's a coincidence? No. It's because I changed my worldview and my belief system. She needs to go back and look at her belief system and interrogate her thoughts. This is one of the tools we give in our book. Interrogate your thoughts, because we tell ourselves lies based on our worst insecurities all the time, and we believe them and react to them as if they're true. We lie to ourselves all the time. We must stop lying to ourselves. It's that simple.
This has been such a fun episode, I tell you. Boy, I have never been so happy to be single. Well, there you have it. You have heard it here on Answers Unleashed. This talk show is always about helping you reshape your brain with science and faith so you find the answers in front of you. We are so excited that you are here today. Thank you for joining us on the show. Now, how do people find you?
Okay, so my website is thewomensvoiceproject.org, or my website is philippasklar.com.
And so feel free to check it out. You're welcome to look at her sites. You're also going to be able to check that out on our website, answersunleashed.com. We are broadcast here live every week through kpcradio.com here on the Pierce College campus. And we are just so excited. If you have a question for any of our callers, if you are a caller and you have a question for any of our guests, feel free to call us at 888 Answers. I know you'll remember that. And ask any question you like, and you never know, your question might be answered here on air. Until next time, tune in again next week for AnswersUnleashed.com. I am here with you, Olympia LePoint, helping you reshape your brain with science and faith to find the answers in front of you. I'll see you next week.